Hello, welcome to the Superpower You podcast. This is episode 79. I'm Lisa Betts-Lacroix, and our topic today is Rebranding Aging.
Welcome to the Superpower You podcast, where we reveal the mental models and tactical skills needed to activate your inner superhero. And here's your host, Lisa Betts-Lacroix.
Hello, lovelies. So welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back to the Superpower You podcast. I'm so happy you're here again. And today I thought I would do a little bit of an update. If you've been listening for a while, you know that I've been thinking a lot about aging, and I have been preparing for a talk that I gave 2 weeks ago in Sedona at the Women Speak International Festival. And I thought that I would share a little bit about that talk for those of you who have not seen it. I was really happy with the way the talk went. It seemed to have landed in a very profound way for many people, and not just people of my age, but people much younger. And I think what I took away from that is a real affirmation that this topic that I've been thinking about, this idea that in our culture, we need to rethink how we consider aging and how we feel about aging and the mindset we have around aging, that we need to challenge the cultural stories. And what was really interesting to me is that the concept, the story, the message landed not just with people my age, but with people much younger. And so I think there's something universal about this need and something that's really up in our culture right now. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about it. Of course, you can go onto the Women Speak Festival. I will link to it in the show notes. So you can go on and you can watch the talk in its very first form. It's going to be iterated on now, and I'll be taking it out to audiences in the aging biology and longevity conference areas, people doing medical science, gerontologists working on changing aging. I will be taking it out to women's empowerment groups for inspiration on how women can think about being a constant reinvention of their previous selves. And I'll be taking it out to more general audiences, as well as to corporations who need the message that the aging demographic is one they do not want to miss out on in terms of who they are marketing to. But in the meantime, I thought I would share a little bit about the talk and about the message with you, with my audience, with my Superpower You community. So one of the things I ask is, what is it exactly that you feel when you think about aging? What kinds of images come to mind? What kind of phrases? And what I know is that so commonly in our culture, not very flattering phrases come to mind. And further, not very flattering images come to mind. It is not compelling. It is not encouraging. And I say that that shouldn't be a surprise to us because our culture has such rigid expectations about what we should each be doing, and especially what we should not be doing at each stage of our lives. Our culture says that once you're old, you're used up and you're irrelevant, and it has all these plans for us and messages and assertions that we should act a certain way, and that once we're beyond a certain age, we should dress appropriately for that age. So it's a culture that's very quick to have us feel that we are too old, or that it's too late for us to do things we might want to do. Because I hear people in their 30s even saying things like, oh my God, I'm getting old, I have to ask, well, what exactly is old? There is online an American Association of Retired People video that asks millennials, people between the ages of around 19 and 35, what age they consider to be old. And the answer, the most common answer those people give is they say, well, the 40s, maybe 50. And then the video makers ask those same millennials to illustrate how an old person does things, like how an old person sends a text message and how an old person crosses the street. And the examples, the physical examples these millennials give are hilarious if you are 50. It's like the image of what we think as being an ancient person who can barely cross the street and barely see. And I just laughed so hard when I saw it. And, and I thought, this is what people think of as being old, and they think that 50 is old. Unbelievable. And, I really understand it. I understand, why people feel fear and concern, and why people as young as 25 or 35 say things like, oh my God, I'm getting old, with panic in their voices. This fear is indoctrinated in our culture. And so in the talk, I tell my own story about the fact that roughly 5 years ago, when I was 49, I happened to be walking past a dance studio in my neighborhood, and I looked through the window and I saw what I later discovered were really high-level teenage, competitive Latin ballroom dancers. And I was completely enraptured. I thought, whatever those kids are doing, I need to do that too. And so I went into the studio and I asked the receptionist about the classes. I asked about the styles of dance the studio taught and what kind of classes I could take, what the schedule was like. And then I bought a card that was good for 10 lessons, 10 dance classes. And I did not use those classes. And the reason is because on some level, I was afraid. I had the fear that we're talking about with regards to concepts on aging. I was hypnotized by that cultural narrative that says, no, you're too old. It's too late for you. At the time, I was 49, like I said, and I was a homeschooling mother of 2 kids, 2 amazing, beautiful kids. And I had spent the previous couple of decades raising them, homeschooling them, and building learning communities and parenting communities around progressive education and independent learning. And somewhere in my mind, in that mindset of being focused on building and supporting my family and my community, and having spent so much time where I really wasn't a major part of my own factoring, there was a part of me that said and felt, oh my gosh, no, I'm too old. It's too late for me to start this very cool, extremely physically challenging, really sexy, youthful type of dance. But the interesting thing is, meanwhile, during all this same period of time, I was involved in and close to the scientific community and connected with anti-aging scientists and entrepreneurs who are making incredible advances in extending our human lifespan and our health span. There are even people in that community who think that it's possible the first human who will live to be 150 years old has already been born. And the interesting thing is that if you ask people if they want to live to be 150, many of them say no. And I would argue that that's because they think that a longer life means a longer time in this period that they associate to decay and to decrepitness, to irrelevance, to invisibility in our culture and to being limited. And the truth is that research shows that as scientists find ways to reverse aging and to extend our health span, the reality is that illness typically shows up closer to the end of life, closer to death. And so what we actually have in front of us as a community, as a collective of humans, is a much extended midlife, many more years of healthy living than any generation that has come before us. We have the possibility of vibrant living past the age that any generation has seen before. But the thing is that in spite of that medical reality, in spite of the statistics that show increasing length of healthy life, our belief system, our mindset, and our stories about aging have not caught up. So we have millennials thinking that 50 is old. And in fact, we are often all living like 50 is old. And so it's my argument and it's my vision and my purpose and the reason that I take this message out into the world, because I believe that it's time for us to write new stories. It's time for us to model new images. It's time for us to change that narrative. It is time for us to collectively rebrand aging. So you remember the dance card that I bought when I went into the studio? Well, it sat in my wallet for 11 months and it was about to expire. And because I like to say I'm my mother's daughter, my mother was really, really frugal with money. And so I say that the idea of wasting $100 just wasn't an option. So I finally went back to the dance studio and I took a class and I absolutely loved it. I started taking regular classes, and the form of dance I was doing at the time was called American Rhythm, and it was the American style of the Latin dances. And I got to the point where I was practicing pretty much every day, and I was taking lots of lessons, and I was taking private lessons. And some nights, I was so obsessed with the dance that some nights when I couldn't sleep, I would just lie in bed and I'd just go over the routines over and over again in my head for hours. I was really obsessed. So then just about 3 months after I started dancing, I did my very first ballroom dance competition. And it's the kind, if you've ever seen ballroom dance, if you've ever seen the movie Strictly Ballroom, you get spray tanned and you wear sequins and long nails. And the combination of that, celebration and physical fun of dressing up and then also getting to share the floor with other amazing dancers and just being challenged to do your best at something that you've been working at under pressure. That kind of challenge got me hooked. So that first year I did 5 more competitions. And then my second year of competing, I did about 10. And then in 2015, which was just less than 2 years after I started dancing, I found myself on a podium in LA with a bouquet of flowers in my arms and the Star-Spangled Banner playing over the speakers. And I had won. I was the winner of a world title in my age category. So after that, I started speaking about the possibility of being a change agent. And I did a project through Shine, which is an organization I'll link to. And I'll link to this talk as well, which was the first iteration of this current Rebranding Aging talk called Change Agents. And I talked about people like Rose Green, who it was a 78-year-old record-holding sprinter who started running when she was 76 years old. And I talked about Ernestine Shepherd, who started bodybuilding in her 60s, and then at 82 is unbelievably buff. You'll see a picture in the show notes if you go to lisabl.com/79, where you'll find links to all of this stuff. So I started to perform and to continue competing and to dance. It was a really exciting time in my life. It was a time of reinvention, of creating another chapter after spending so much of my focus supporting my husband's career and my family and their education and my community. But then a year later, in 2016, and I've talked a little bit about this when I was going through it, my mom, my beautiful mama, was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And she had just 3 very brutal months. If you know anything about pancreatic cancer, then you probably won't be surprised to learn that we had just 3 months together. And she was, during that period of time, in really rapid decline. And it was just enough time for us to spend time together and for people who loved her to come and to say goodbye and to thank her for what she had contributed to their lives. It was a beautiful and really moving period of time for my family to have with her. And then in September of 2016, she died at home, surrounded by all of our immediate family. And if you go back and listen to a previous episode, I'll link to it in the show notes, with Sandy Buckman. I interviewed her hospice doctor about that experience and about what it means to do end of life at home. It's quite a beautiful episode also. So you can go back and listen to that. And, if you're someone who's experienced this kind of loss in your life, my heart really goes out to you, because there's really no preparation for the kind of grief that losing a parent entails. And then just as I was beginning to pick myself up from that grief of losing my mother, my marriage of 20 years started to disintegrate. So while it had been one thing for me to be involved in dancing and to be engaged and passionate and then to be saying, hey, I'm celebrating aging, it was a really different thing. And it was quite the test to see if I could still believe that to be true when my hair was literally falling out in clumps from stress and from my changing hormones and from grief. And then the question was, could I stand behind this belief system that I was speaking about on stages about the fact that aging can be a beautiful thing when I was confronted with what people fear most about aging. And that is the knowledge that with living, definitely with aging, there's no way to avoid pain and loss. So that even if we're living the most beautiful, vibrant, engaged, exciting lives, we're not going to be able to avoid grieving. We're going to grieve. We're going to grieve our youth. We're going to grieve our physical bodies changing because there's no escaping that. We're going to grieve our loved ones getting sick and dying at some point, our partners changing their minds, our relationships ending, our kids growing up and leaving home. We are all going to grieve. But what happened for me, what showed up for me with that grief was a level of connection and support and love, so much love from my community, my friends, my family, the women, so much the women. Yes, there were men too, but the women in my life showed up in the most profound way. And they laid a foundation for my future, and they reflected future me back to me before I even knew what it was going to look like. And they reminded me that reinvention isn't something that happens once, that constant regeneration and change is our true nature. It is our true nature as human beings, and it is especially our true nature as women, because from such an early age, we experience our bodies changing and going through different stages over and over and over again. So we are like perennial plants. Unlike annuals, annual flowers, annual plants, which bloom for one season and then they die, our roots, our foundation, is solidly planted in the ground after it's established, year after year. And it gets stronger and deeper, and it propagates the strength and the power so that when each new season comes around, the flowers, the blooms emerge again with a greater showing, with a fuller production of blooms, with more vibrancy and color with every passing year. And the amazing thing is that you do not see perennials blooming alone. They propagate, they support, they grow, they are like a vibrant community. So when I first started this show, I mentioned the query of what people think about when they hear the word or the concept of aging. And it is my intention now, and it is my intention going forward. It is my commitment that when we think about aging as a community, as a people, as women, as parents, as workers, as all of us, that when we think about aging, we think about it differently. That we together rewrite the story that says, oh, you're too old or it's too late. And that instead of running from the pain and the loss that's inevitable with it, that we embrace those things as the fire from which we will emerge anew. That we remember that from here on in, we're like perennials, that every transition is an opportunity to rebloom over and over again. And I say, what fun could we have? What kind of adventures could we go on? What kind of relationships could we build with our loved ones, with our friends, with the people who surround us? If we supported each other in this process, if we celebrated the possibilities together, then I say, imagine what we could collectively do and imagine what we could contribute to the world if we had access to our accumulated wisdom. And if we remembered that aging and all that comes with it, the good and the bad, the grief, the loss, the joy, is a constant opportunity to reinvent the self. So that is the essence of my rebranding aging story. And I'll be taking this topic out into the world. I'll be sharing it with companies about this demographic that is an aging population that has so much to bring, so much to offer the world if it isn't disregarded by these old stories. And I'll be taking it to women's conferences and meetings, and I'll be taking it to aging conferences, to biotech gatherings. So if you know of someone who could benefit from hearing this message, from hearing this story, please reach out to me at lisa@lisabl.com. And you can go onto my speaking page. It's lisabl.com/speaking for more information. And please help me get this message out. I truly, deeply believe that if we can change the way we collectively envision the aging process, that we can be free of the fear that so often comes with aging, that we can be vibrant, that we can live the most beautiful and engaged and vibrant and contributive lives possible, where we can have our wisdom and our beauty and our vibrancy converging for the good of all. So please help me get this message out. Thank you for being here. As always, I so appreciate it. If this message has touched you in any way, please do share it with someone else. Make sure to subscribe to the show on any podcast platform. You can find a video of some dancing and all the links to everything that I've mentioned in the show notes at lisabl.com/79, and follow us on the Superpower You Facebook page. Follow me personally on Instagram at LisaBL. And for now, I send you love, and I send you this beautiful vision of what's possible if we rewrite the stories that limit us. So until next week, I send so much love.
Thank you for listening to the Superpower You podcast. Please subscribe to the show on iTunes and get more information at lisabl.com.